Hello, I'm Dr. John Child. I'm from the University of Birmingham. I'm a reader in criminal law. I've been asked to talk to you today on the topic of PhD candidate to lecturer. So there are many reasons, of course, for doing a PhD, and some of you studying a PhD may not want to go into the profession in terms of academia as a lecturer, and that's perfectly reasonable, of course, lots of very good reasons for doing a PhD. This talk, though, is for those of you who do see your career progressing in that way, and I want to talk to you about how you should be thinking and what you should be thinking about in terms of setting yourself up to be the best applicant you can possibly be when it comes to going for your first job. Now, as it happens, just in the last couple of months, I've been involved in shortlisting for lectureships at the University of Birmingham in the law school there, and also in the interview process around that. So it's very much fresh in my head in terms of what I was looking for, what impressed me and what didn't, when looking through the big sort of stack of applications that we had for that, whittling them down, and then in the eventual decision for who to offer jobs to at the end as well. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to talk through the sort of milestones in your journey as a PhD student through to an applicant for a lectureship, and thinking about the kinds of choices that you're making and trying to give you a bit of a steer in terms of those choices. The first stage, if I just click through to it, is obviously applying for a PhD. So most of you watching this will be PhD students already, but this is then to think about the choices that you've already made when you were first applying. But also for those of you who are in the early stages of your PhD, some of those PhD formation questions that you're trying to deal with at the moment, this might help you, I hope, with some of those. So the first issue is topic. So when you're applying for your first lectureship, the major piece of work that you have achieved is, of course, your PhD, and so that defines you and it places you as an applicant of what kind of academic you want to be and what kind of academic might you be for us as an institution. Now, that places you in terms of obviously subject area, but also in terms of your focus. Is the major thrust of your research about social justice? Is it about doctrinal accuracy? Is it about theoretical coherence? Is it about empirical engagement? What is it that your research is trying to achieve, and what does that tell us about you as a researcher in terms of fitting in with the various different sort of ethos of different law schools around the country? And that's something to think about. How do those law schools self-describe, and to what extent does your PhD engage with that? And if it doesn't perhaps naturally engage with that, how might you address it within something like a covering letter, which talks about the way that you research and how it will complement the ethos of the law school that you're applying to? Equally, if not more important though here, is to think about the skills that you're developing. So when you're coming to your first lectureship, we're not expecting you to be a finished product in terms of a researcher. This is still early on in your journey. But I do want to see demonstrated skills that you've gained from your PhD that set you up for moving forward in terms of a lectureship and the first papers that you'll be writing and the kinds of research that you'll be doing. So what am I looking for here? Well, first of all, the intellectual ambition of the research itself. So I'm much more interested in applicants who have taken on very challenging issues within their PhD, questions that we don't know the answer to, ambition in terms of what they're trying to achieve through their work, as opposed to a PhD which is perhaps a little more safe, where I can see that there has been a lot of work gone into it. Of course, no PhD is easy, but the more ambitious that you are in your work, realistically ambitious, then the better in terms of it being an exciting application and for me to see your potential as a researcher that's really going to make an impact on the world going forward. Beyond that, in terms of the sort of methods that you're using, so for more theoretical doctrinal PhDs, I'm thinking about what are the areas of theory that you're engaged with and what does that tell me about the kinds of articles that you might be able to write going forward, particularly for those of you who use empirical methodologies. What methods are you using? How effectively do you understand them, and are you using them? How rigorous are you, and so on? And that tells me a lot then about the kind of methods that you're going to be able to use, of course, that you might employ in different areas going forward. I've mentioned potential impact there as well. This is not something, of course, that applies to everybody, but this is very much on our agenda now because of ref type understanding of impact. And that means what potential is there for your work to engage with an audience outside of academia, so perhaps policymakers or charities or NGOs and so on. Is there a potential there? And just as importantly, do you understand if there's a potential there? So if there is a potential, I think, then it's something I would expect you to know and for you to talk about within your future aspirations for your research, either to tell me why you're going to take an impact agenda to some part of your work, or if you're not, why you're not, why you're focusing in different areas for now. The fact that you understand that at least as a priority is important. And anything that you've done to start to engage with audiences outside of academia within your PhD, all the better. Lastly, in terms of the place, supervisors, both important, perhaps not as important as sometimes people would imply, but there is something in this in terms of the reassurance it gives me as a shortlister. So if I can see that someone's using certain methods, for example, and their supervisors are experts in that methodology, then I can be that much more confident that the training that they're receiving is rigorous and that they're able to conduct themselves properly in that research area. So if your supervisor does have a particular expertise which is relevant to your work, then again, don't be shy in showcasing that when it comes to applications later as well. The next step, though, actually during your PhD, and this is the kind of big choices you're making right now and the things you should be thinking about to try and make yourself the best applicant possible coming out the other end. So the headline, slightly boring sometimes, but it is the headline and you shouldn't lose sight of it, and this is timely completion. So if you are studying your PhD on a full-time capacity, I would expect to see you complete within 3 to 4 year period. Now, there are good reasons why sometimes that's not possible, but outside of those sort of exceptional circumstances, 3 to 4 years has to be a hard deadline. And it demonstrates to me as a potential employer, alongside your skill as a researcher, which you'll show me via other means, but it shows me your essential ability to meet a deadline. The fact that if we employ you, you are someone who is organized and dependable to be able to not just do excellent work, but to do it in a timely fashion, and to do it in a way where we can give you tasks alongside your research, as you will inevitably get as a lecturer, more teaching, more administrative responsibilities and so on, and I can be confident that you're someone who can organise your time effectively. So it's a big kind of blunt indicator of those things, but it's one of the best ones that we have as a shortlisting panel, so it's one that you should take note of. Alongside that is to think about how what you're going to showcase the 3 parts of the job that you're applying for, and what you need to do to be able to showcase them most effectively. First of all, in terms of your research, so be active. That means going to conferences, internal, external, nationally, internationally even. Engaging in an academic community as much as possible is excellent, both for your work now, but also in terms of demonstrating that sort of ability to engage in the community. And alongside that, of course, publishing. So publishing has been important for a number of years, although it is very important to say that the emphasis in the last few years has switched, and I think switched for the better, and that's because the new ref rules, or the ref rules that we're working under at the moment, have very much prioritized quality over quantity. So whereas as writing for publication became more and more important during your PhD, you were perhaps told to write 3, 4, 5 pieces and have that volume. Now it's much more important that you produce 1 or 2 very good papers that absolutely demonstrate your quality and your potential as a researcher. When you're going for a job, it is likely that they will ask you to send them 1 or 2 papers to demonstrate your writing, and you need those papers to sing. So very much in terms of your writing for publication plans, don't worry about it too much in your first year. Don't worry about it too much in the early stages of your second year. But as you move towards the end of your PhD, try and think about at least that 1 excellent or 2 excellent papers that can really set you up for that job afterwards and demonstrate that quality. And use your colleagues here, both your supervisors and beyond, those who are experienced with ref reading, to give you some help in terms of reviewing your work before it's published, to try and make sure within that ref criteria as well, that this paper is the best showcase of your work it can be. Now, alongside that, of course, think about your teaching. So these are the 3 things I think that you should prioritize. So, of course, when we're employing somebody, we've got certain teaching needs, and often those teaching needs are in the core subjects. So that means the qualifying law degree subjects where you've got the biggest bulk of students and therefore the biggest bulk of teaching. So that's contract law, that's tort law, that's criminal law, EU law, and so on and so on. Now, if your research is in one of those areas and you can teach as well, all the better. But if your research isn't, if your research is in more of a niche kind of area, then remember, if you come to a application stage and you're saying, I can teach the area that I research, which is realistically a small master's cohort, then you're quite a luxury as an academic in terms of someone that whether we have space to employ someone like that. So if you can at all do it, especially early on in your career, what you want to be able to say is, even if your research is in a particular niche area, that yes, you can offer that specialism to improve masters, improve options, but also you offer something in the core, a dependable sort of teaching, demonstrated quality in teaching in one of those big core undergraduate subjects. And if you can offer both of those, that can be very, very important. And alongside that, care and innovation. So we're not just going to ask you what you can teach, we're also going to ask you about your teaching, the way you teach, how you deal with difficult groups, what you've thought about in terms of innovative ways to engage students, to make them think more, and so on. So care about that teaching that you do, because it will certainly be something that the employer cares about as well. And lastly, in terms of administration, this is of course part of our job. Then few opportunities perhaps, or fewer opportunities as a PhD student to engage in this, and it's not something that you want to distract you from your project too much. But if you can show some activity here, all the better. For example, by being a PhD rep, or for example, working with an academic colleague when they're organising a conference or something like this that demonstrates your ability to engage with these tasks and to do them effectively, then all the better. Last up then, you've got to the stage, you finish your PhD hopefully, and you are applying for your job. So think about the kinds of jobs that you're applying for, and there are some options here. The first one is to think about perhaps postdocs. So this is an opportunity where you're essentially applying for a fixed-term contract working on somebody else's project. So this is where an academic has gained funding of some kind and they're employing you as their postdoc to research with them. Be careful here about what that role is. So they will be very, very different from one another. So think about what you're being asked to do. Make sure that if you're taking a research role, that your name will be on papers, that kind of thing. But as long as those things are in place, and they often are, then this can really boost your employability. And it can be a very, very positive thing. It can boost the kind of places that you can apply for and so on. There are problems though, and there is a big beware here. They require flexibility, so often postdocs will be dotted here, there, and around the country, and you may have to move. They're not often sort of set up to move you into a secure contract afterwards. This is very much about a short-term position to boost your CV before you apply somewhere else for something more permanent. And because of that, the fact that they are precarious is important. Be aware of the fact that you are going to face cliff edges with this kind of contract, and people can get drawn into that and have big problems where they're having to sort of dot around and almost constantly applying for jobs as they go. So these are very worthwhile opportunities, and if the right project comes along, I would not discourage you from applying for it, but be careful and be aware of the downsides to not having a permanent job as well, particularly in times of instability where if there's problems in the funding, then you don't have that secure contract behind you. The next one is in terms of a teaching track position. So this is what used to be called teaching fellows and now just called sort of standard lecturers, but with a teaching focus, where essentially you're doing all the job of a normal lecturer, but instead of the research element, you focus on a smaller amount of scholarship. in terms of keeping on top of the material, and your teaching load increases. Now, this is a growing field. You see more and more of these positions coming up, and they have great opportunities. The promotion track attached to them as well has been pretty much resolved or dealt with in a lot of universities now, so there's a clear progression within this role, and it's a valued member of any faculty. This is something that if you want to do it, you should be thinking about quite early on in your PhD, because you want to demonstrate that this is something that you care about. So you want to think about the kind of pedagogy of what you're using, ideally even engaging in some research in that regard, thinking about much more about your teaching methods and so on, and your approach to teaching in more general terms. So find a good teaching mentor early and talk to them about this track and what you need to do for your CV. Beware though, so this is a beware not if this is the track you want. I would very much encourage you to do it if it is, but it's a beware because of, I think, the reputation of these positions, at least in the last 10-20 years, have often been about this is a junior position as a teaching fellow from which you will move into a research contract. Now, that has been a dominant image of this kind of contract, and to some extent it still is in some places. I would be very seriously beware of that idea. I think more and more universities are valuing the role of teaching fellows and therefore want to see good quality of teaching. Now, if they're not seeing that because you're spending your time doing your research, then of course you're not doing your job properly. And equally, if you're trying to be that kind of best quality teacher you can be and trying to do your research, you can find out that you don't have time to do either properly, and so therefore any thought of changing between contracts becomes shut down as well. So I would just say here, if this is the route for you because you're passionate about teaching and passionate about pedagogy, then absolutely go for it. If you are a researcher and you want that to be part of your contract, I would be very, very cautious in the current climate about going for a job like this thinking you can transition. It's something that I think has been shutting down and is very unlikely in the current climate. The last track though is the sort of teaching and research track. So this is the 3 parts to your job: teaching, research and administration. And this is now about showcasing that stuff that we talked about in the previous slide. So showcasing your potential in all 3 parts of the job, demonstrating of course where possible, but also showing that potential going forward. Now in your research, something that I don't often see actually in a number of applications, but I think it's a really important one, is what is your 5-year plan? If you're a brand new lecturer, I don't expect you to have a massive long track record of research, but I do expect you to be thinking about what you are going to do in your research moving forward. That now your PhD is finished, what are the next stages for you? And if you can show me that 5-year plan and demonstrate within it that you understand the ref cycles, so talk to a colleague about this, but I want you to be telling me this is what is achievable within the current ref cycle. This is how I can be an asset to your research community within your institution. This is my plan for the next ref cycle. This is what I'm going to prioritize in this order, and so on. And the more detail you can give me in that plan, the more impressed I am for your potential as a member of staff moving forward. And the last point here is a simple one: apply less and better. There are lots and lots of applications for lectureship jobs, but a lot of those applications are relatively generic, where you see people are producing something that they're sending out to lots of different institutions. Those will rarely get very far within the process. That what we're looking for is someone who has taken their time to do a very good application. They've thought about the institution they're applying to in terms of what is the ethos of that institution and their research, about what is their teaching offering and what can the applicant bring to the teaching that's being offered in that institution, and so on. So take your time and make that application absolutely spot on to give you the absolute best chance you can have when applying for a job. And of course, as always, you need a little bit of luck at the end.